The rain lashed against the orphanage windows like angry fingers drumming for entry, the wind howling through the cracks in the old wooden frame with a voice that seemed almost human. Joseph lay awake, curled tightly beneath his thin blanket, his small bed creaking beneath him as he turned to stare out into the storm. The other children were asleep, their soft breathing rising and falling like waves in the darkness, but something about the storm made Joseph's skin prickle. It wasn't just the cold. It was something deeper, something wrong. Then he saw it. A figure stood beneath the flickering street lamp at the far edge of the orphanage's courtyard. Tall, rigid, draped in a long, dark coat that rippled gently in the wind. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, watching. Joseph sat up slowly, his fingers tightening around the blanket. His breath fogged the cold glass as he leaned in. The man's face was shadowed beneath the wide brim of a hat, his features unreadable. But in his gloved hand, he held something bright, vivid, a yellow umbrella. Joseph's breath caught in his throat, a pang of something sharp and familiar slicing through his chest. His heart clenched. That umbrella. Just like the one his mother used to carry on rainy days, the one she would twirl above his head and laugh, singing as she spun him around on cobbled streets. It was the last thing he remembered clearly before she was gone. No one at the orphanage had umbrellas. They were too expensive, too unnecessary. But Joseph had never stopped dreaming of one. Of that one. Why was the man just standing there? Who was he? A blinding flash of lightning split the sky, lighting up the courtyard for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Joseph saw the face beneath the hat, a jagged scar carved down one side, his lips moving soundlessly, as if whispering to the storm itself. A shiver crawled down Joseph's spine like ice on skin. And then, the man moved. Just one step forward, deliberate and slow, but it was enough to send Joseph's instincts into overdrive. Every nerve screamed at him to run, to hide, but something deeper, something aching and curious, held him there. He had to know more. He had to. Sliding out of bed as quietly as he could, he tiptoed to the door, barefoot on the cold wooden floor. The orphanage seemed to groan around him, the walls straining with the weight of the wind. His heart thudded against his ribs like a drum of warning. Then came a sound that nearly made him scream, a crash, loud and sharp, echoing through the building. The front gate had swung open, slamming into the stone wall. The wind carried something strange with it, like whispers, hundreds of them, too soft to make sense of but too loud to ignore. The next sound was worse. Click. The unmistakable turn of a lock. Not closing, but opening. Someone was inside. Joseph's breath stilled. His legs refused to move. Should he run to wake the others? Call for Miss Eleanor? But even the thought of making a sound felt dangerous. Before he could decide, the door to the hallway creaked open. A long, slow groan. And then a shadow spilled into the room like ink, stretching across the wooden floorboards. Joseph's blood turned to ice. He ducked beneath the bed, the cold pressing against his chest, his breath shallow and silent. Every inch of him trembled as the figure entered. Heavy boots stepped softly across the room. Closer. The air shifted, heavy with damp earth and something sharp and metallic. The scent of rust, or was it blood, filled Joseph's nostrils. He clamped a hand over his mouth, terrified even his breathing would give him away. The boots stopped. A gloved hand reached for the nightstand drawer. Joseph's few possessions rattled as the man sifted through them. His old, dog-eared book. A pencil stub barely long enough to hold. A small wooden bird Joseph had carved in the summer, trying to remember what hope felt like. Then the rummaging stopped. Joseph knew what he had found. The drawing. A crumpled piece of paper he had carried for years. His sketch of a yellow umbrella, simple, childlike, but precious. It was all he had left of her. He watched through the gap beneath the bed as the man held it, not carelessly, but gently. Reverently, the fingers traced the lines like they meant something, as if they mattered. Then, slowly, the drawing was returned to its place. Without a word, the man turned and left. Silent as mist. Joseph didn't move, not until he heard the front door open, then softly click shut again. The wind moaned through the empty hall. Only then did he crawl out from beneath the bed, legs trembling with fear and confusion and something that felt like loss all over again. He ran to the window, his breath fogging the glass, his hands pressed against the pane. The man was gone. The street lamp flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the glistening courtyard. Rain still poured, blurring the world beyond, but Joseph stared through it, heart racing. Who was he? And why had he come for that? But the yellow umbrella was no longer in the man's hand. Joseph's breath caught in his throat, his chest tightening with disbelief. Because now, resting silently against the windowsill inside his room, was an umbrella. Bright, yellow, and impossibly real. His eyes widened, heart slamming against his ribs. It hadn't been there before, he was sure of it. He would have seen it, felt it. But now it stood like a relic from a dream, glowing faintly in the pale light of the storm-muted window. He took a hesitant step closer, every inch of him trembling. Then another. His hand reached forward before he could stop it, fingers quivering as they closed around the smooth, worn handle. The moment his skin touched it, a wave of emotion surged through him, shock, warmth, longing. 1,000 memories blurred and crashed behind his eyes. It was real, solid, heavy with rain, frayed at the edges, but it was there. How? His mind reeled. 100 questions flooded in like the storm outside, loud, relentless, unanswerable. Who was the man? How did he know Joseph's name? Why had he left behind the one thing Joseph had cherished only in dreams? He turned the umbrella slowly in his hands, his eyes scanning its surface like it held secrets. It wasn't new. The fabric was faded, the ends slightly frayed. The handle had the smoothness of something once held 1,000 times by loving hands. And then he saw it, carved delicately into the wood, just above the grip, faint but unmistakable. Joseph. His breath caught again, and this time it trembled on the way out. A memory swelled from the shadows of his mind. He was small, barely 4, his tiny hand wrapped tightly in his mother's. The city had been loud, bustling with life, but all Joseph had noticed was the darkening sky and the thunder rolling like giants in the clouds. He had been scared. Then she'd smiled, his mother, radiant, calm. She pulled out a bright yellow umbrella and held it above them, its sunburst hue defying the gray sky. "Hold on tight, Joseph," she had whispered, laughing as the wind tugged at the canopy like an impatient child. He remembered the way she'd crouched to meet his eyes, brushing his damp hair from his forehead, her warmth chasing the cold away. And then, screams, pain, the blinding wail of sirens. The memory splintered, and Joseph gasped, stumbling back from the window as though struck. The umbrella nearly slipped from his hand. He steadied himself. His heart ached. The grief was sudden, sharp, and raw, like touching a wound he thought had scarred over. He had to know. Where had this umbrella come from? Why now? Still holding it tightly, he crept to the door. His bare feet made no sound on the worn wooden floorboards as he crossed the room. The handle felt strangely warm in his grip, as if it remembered him too. At the doorway, he paused. The orphanage was silent, too silent. Even the storm had quieted, the rain now a soft murmur against the panes. The breathless stillness made his skin crawl. Joseph reached out and turned the knob. It gave without resistance. Unlocked. Had Miss Eleanor forgotten to bolt it for the night? That had never happened before. Or had the man, the stranger, left it that way, just for him? His heart pounded as he stepped into the hallway. Shadows danced across the peeling wallpaper. Everything felt heavy, like the house itself was holding a secret. He made his way to the front door. It, too, opened easily. And then Joseph stepped outside. The air wrapped around him like a cold whisper, damp with rain and earth. The cobblestone street glistened with puddles that caught the glow of flickering gas lamps, stretching strange shapes into the night. No sign of the man. But something else was there. A small object lay at the foot of the gate, half submerged in a puddle, leather warped and worn by water. Joseph's eyes locked onto it. A notebook. Down, scooping it up with careful hands. It was heavier than expected, soaked through, but still intact. He flipped it open with trembling fingers. The ink had bled in places, words smudged into ghostly shapes, but one line stood out, dark, determined, and eerily clear. "Find the key. It will lead you to the truth." Joseph's pulse quickened. The message was meant for him. He knew it deep in his bones. And just beneath the words, sketched in the same hurried hand, was a single symbol. A yellow umbrella. He stared at it, his breath rising in pale puffs in the chill night air. He didn't understand, not fully. But the feeling in his chest, somewhere between dread and wonder, told him this wasn't a game. This was real. He was about to close the notebook when something else caught his eye. More pages. He flipped through them quickly, the pages sticking together, until words began to emerge from the ruined ink. They are watching. Not safe at the orphanage. Joseph's grip tightened on the notebook. And then he saw it. A name. Scrawled over and over again, sometimes small, sometimes large, almost frantic in its repetition. Like the writer had clung to it as a last thread of sanity. Hawthorne. The name sent a cold rush through him, though he had never heard it before. Still, it echoed inside his head like a bell. He could feel it. This name mattered. It was important. It was everything. As he stared down at the ink-streaked paper, something shifted beneath the spine of the notebook. His fingers explored the inner edge and felt a tiny bulge. Joseph pried it open carefully, and out slipped a small brass key. It landed in his palm with a soft clink, shockingly cold despite having been nestled inside the book. He held it up to the dim light. Simple, unmarked, but unmistakably old. And powerful. The moment it touched his skin, a strange silence seemed to fall over the world. Even the rain paused for a breath. The night leaned in, listening. Joseph swallowed hard, his thoughts spinning. A notebook, a name, a key, a yellow umbrella that shouldn't exist. A mystery that went beyond the walls of the orphanage. Beyond even his own memories. He had no answers yet. But one truth blazed in his chest like fire. His life was no longer what it had been. And it would never be the same again. Inside, the orphanage was just as silent as before, but Joseph felt different. The yellow umbrella and the key weighed heavily in his hands as he slipped back into bed, shoving both beneath his thin pillow. Sleep didn't come easily. When morning arrived, the world seemed normal again. The other children chattered over their breakfast, the scent of oatmeal and bread filling the dining hall. But Joseph wasn't listening. His thoughts churned, repeating the same words from the notebook. Find the key. It will lead you to the truth. He already had the key. Now he needed to find what it opened. The problem? He had no idea where to start. And worse, someone else might be looking for it too. The weight of the key pressed against Joseph's palm as he sat at the long wooden dining table, staring at his untouched bowl of oatmeal. Around him, the other children laughed and talked, scraping their spoons against the ceramic. But their voices felt distant, like echoes in a tunnel. He had barely slept. His mind kept circling back to the same questions. Who was Hawthorne? What did the key open? Why had someone left it for him? Miss Eleanor's voice cut through his thoughts. Joseph, are you feeling all right? He blinked up at her. She was watching him with her usual kind but firm gaze, her graying hair pinned into a neat bun. He had lived at the orphanage for as long as he could remember, and Miss Eleanor had always been the closest thing to family. I'm fine, he mumbled, forcing a spoonful of oatmeal into his mouth. It tasted like sawdust. She didn't look convinced, but with so many children to care for, she didn't press further. Joseph forced himself to act normal, but his fingers twitched beneath the table, itching to pull out the key and examine it again. He needed answers, and he needed them soon. By the time breakfast ended, he had made up his mind. If no one would tell him the truth, he would find it himself. The first place he checked was the orphanage's library, a small, dusty room lined with bookshelves that leaned slightly from age. Most of the books were dull, old history texts, religious sermons, and a handful of children's stories. But Joseph wasn't looking for entertainment. He was looking for a name. He ran his finger down the spines of the books, searching for anything that mentioned Hawthorne. Nothing. Then, an idea struck him. He hurried to the wooden desk at the front of the library, where Miss Eleanor kept old records of the orphanage. If the name Hawthorne had anything to do with this place, there might be a record of it. Glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching, Joseph carefully slid open the top drawer. Inside were stacks of yellowed papers, receipts, and ledgers. His heart pounded as he shuffled through them. Then, he found it. An old file labeled, Hawthorne Inquiry, 1897. Joseph's fingers trembled as he pulled it free. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but he could still make out the words. To Miss Eleanor Hawksworth, orphanage matron. As per your request, we have investigated the claims regarding the Hawthorne estate and its connection to the missing child. No further evidence has been found. The case remains closed. Regards, Detective R. Whitmore. Joseph's stomach flipped. A missing child? A connection to an estate? The words blurred together as his thoughts raced. He had lived in this orphanage his whole life, or at least as far back as he could remember. What if he had been brought here? What if he was the missing child? The sound of approaching footsteps made his heart jolt. Without thinking, he shoved the file back into the drawer and slipped out of the library, the key still clutched tightly in his hand. He needed to find the Hawthorne estate, and he needed to do it before someone stopped him. The problem was, Joseph had no idea where to start. He had never left the orphanage alone before, and the city beyond its iron gates was a maze of cobblestone streets, towering buildings, and strangers who never met his eyes. But he knew one place that might hold the answer. The market square. Miss Eleanor sometimes took the older children there to help carry supplies. The square was always filled with merchants, travelers, and people who knew things Joseph needed to hear. That afternoon, while the other children played in the courtyard, he made his move. Slipping through the back door, he pulled the yellow umbrella tightly under his arm and hurried down the street. The city smelled of rain-soaked stone and fresh bread, and the sounds of horse-drawn carriages clattered in the distance. When he reached the market, his nerves tensed. He had never been here alone. People moved past him in waves, shouting about apples, cloth, and fresh fish. He swallowed hard and approached an old bookseller hunched over a wooden stall, surrounded by leather-bound tomes. "Excuse me," Joseph said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Do you know anything about the Hawthorne estate?" The bookseller's hands froze over the pages of a book. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, his eyes narrowing. "Why do you ask?" Joseph hesitated. I found the name in an old record." The old man studied him for a long moment. Then, in a low voice, he said, "You should forget that name, boy. Nothing good comes from Hawthorne." Joseph's heart pounded. "Please, I need to know." The bookseller sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's an old estate, abandoned for years. People say it's haunted. Others say it hides things no one should find. Where is it?" The old man hesitated, then reluctantly pointed toward the western hills, beyond the city's edge. "Past the river, through the woods. But listen to me, lad, stay away. No one goes there anymore. And those who do." His voice trailed off. Joseph didn't need to hear the rest. He had made up his mind. He was going to the Hawthorne estate, even if it meant uncovering secrets that had been buried for years. Had fallen by the time Joseph reached the outskirts of the city. The dirt path leading into the woods was slick with mud, and the towering trees swayed in the wind. He pulled his coat tighter around himself, gripping the umbrella like a lifeline. A part of him whispered that this was foolish, that the bookseller had warned him for a reason. But a stronger part, the part that had never stopped wondering where he came from, pushed him forward. The woods were silent except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustle of unseen creatures. The deeper he went, the more the trees seemed to press in, their twisted branches stretching like skeletal fingers. Then, through the gaps in the trees, he saw it. A mansion, crumbling with age, its windows hollow and dark. The iron gate hung open, rusted and bent. The Hawthorne estate. Joseph's breath came fast. He stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. And then, a shadow moved behind one of the broken windows. Joseph froze. He wasn't alone. Someone was inside, and they had been waiting for him. Joseph stepped into the mansion, his pulse racing. The old man waiting inside studied him with sad, knowing eyes. "You came," the man murmured. "Who are you?" Joseph asked, gripping the yellow umbrella. The man exhaled. "Someone who never stopped searching for you." He led Joseph up a creaking staircase into a dusty study. Newspaper clippings covered the walls. "Hawthorne heir disappears, presumed dead." A portrait stood at the center, a woman in pale blue, holding a yellow umbrella. Joseph's breath caught. His mother. "They took you to erase the Hawthorne name," the old man said. "But you were never forgotten." Joseph traced the umbrella's handle, his mother's memory clearer than ever. He had spent his life searching for belonging, never realizing the truth was waiting for him. "What happens now?" he whispered. The old man smiled. "Now, you come home." Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky stretched open, bright and endless. For the first time, Joseph wasn't lost. He knew who he was. And under his mother's yellow umbrella, he knew he would never be alone again.